This is TWiT.
Denmark has become the fourth EU member, joining Austria, France, and Italy, to rule that the use of Google Analytics is illegal in Denmark. The Danish Data Protection Agency ruled this week, actually it was last week, that the use of Google Analytics inside the country is not compliant with the GDPR. The agency told local companies to either adjust the tool for increased privacy, and actually there are no useful adjustments, as we'll see in a second, or stop using it. The beginning of an explanation published last Wednesday, it said, quote, in January 2022, the Austrian Data Protection Authority issued a decision on the use of Google Analytics by an Austrian organization. So that was January of this year. Since then, the Austrian Data Protection Authority has issued another decision on the use of the tool, and several decisions have also been issued by the French Data Protection Authority. Most recently, in June, the Italian Data Protection Authority issued a decision on the use of the tool meaning Google Analytics. In all of these cases, the supervisory authorities found that the use of Google Analytics under the given circumstances was unlawful. The senior legal advisor at the Danish Data Protection Agency said, quote, the GDPR is made to protect the privacy of European citizens. This means, among other things, that you should be able to visit a website without your data ending up in the wrong hands. We've carefully reviewed the possible settings of Google Analytics and have come to the conclusion that you cannot use the tool in its current form without implementing supplementary measures. Since the decisions by our European colleagues, we have looked into the tool and the specific settings available to you when you intend to use Google Analytics. This has been particularly relevant as Google, following the first Austrian decision, has begun to provide additional settings in relation to what data can be collected by the tool. However, our conclusion is that the tool still cannot, without more, be used lawfully. Okay, so, organizations in Denmark that employ Google Analytics, which is on so many websites.
Including ours, I might add. Does this mean I can't have any more Denmark listeners?
Yeah. Okay, so that's really a question, right? Is like the fact that the GDPR technically reaches us, right? And so, we have to be compliant if EU citizens come to websites in the U.S. So anyway, its use is widespread, and organizations in Denmark, after this order, must assess whether their possible continued use of the tool takes place in compliance with data protection law, and the ruling here says it can't. And if it's not the case that they can be compliant, the organization must either bring its use of the tool into compliance or, if necessary, discontinue using the tool. So there are now 4 countries which have all said it's not possible for the tool to be used in compliance regardless of its settings. The senior legal advisor said, a very important task for the Danish Data Protection Agency is to give guidance to citizens about their rights and to give guidance to Danish organizations in how they comply with data protection law. As is the case with data protection law, we at the Danish Data Protection Agency are neutral to technology and therefore have no interest in either approving or banning certain products. We are not at all empowered to do so. Following the decisions of our European colleagues, however, we've experienced a great demand for guidance in relation to specifically Google Analytics, and we have therefore made an effort to look into this specific tool more closely. Okay, so the message from the Danish Data Protection Agency is that any enterprise's websites that are within Danish jurisdiction or, again, actually within the reach of the EU's GDPR, which use Google Analytics, must put in place a plan to bring their use into compliance by implementing supplementary measures. We'll get to that in one second. And they said, if it is not possible to implement effective supplementary measures, you must stop using the tool, and if necessary, find another tool that can provide web analytics and allows for compliance with data protection law. Boy, Google must be really getting some headaches with all this. For example, they said, by not transferring personal data about visitors to unsafe third countries. Okay, so what are these supplementary measures that could be taken? Well, it turns out that France, the second of the 4 EU countries to object to Google's analytics, invested some technical resources to provide a document which answers the question. The document, dated July 20th of this year, a little over 2 months ago, is titled Google Analytics and Data Transfers, How to Make Your Analytics Tool Compliant with the GDPR. Okay, so the French document explains. It says, the Court of Justice of the European Union, CJEU, in its ruling 16 July 2020, invalidated the Privacy Shield, a mechanism that provided a framework for transfers of personal data between the European Union and the United States. The U.S. legislation does not offer sufficient guarantees in the face of the risk of access by the authorities, particularly intelligence services, to the personal data of European residents. Following these formal notices, many actors have sought to identify the technical settings and measures that can allow to maintain the use of Google Analytics while respecting the privacy of Internet users. However, simply changing the processing settings of the IP address is not sufficient to meet the requirements of the CJEU, especially as these continue to be transferred to the U.S. Another idea often put forward is the use of encryption of the identifier generated by Google Analytics, or replacing it with an identifier generated by the site operator. However, in practice, this provides little to no additional guarantee against possible re-identification of data subjects, mainly due to the persistent processing of the IP address by Google. The fundamental problem that prevents these measures from addressing the issue of access of data by non-European authorities is that of direct contact via an HTTPS connection between the individual's, now they call it a terminal, but that we know that's PC and browser or device and browser, the individual's terminal and servers managed by Google. The resulting requests allow these servers to obtain the IP address of the Internet user, as well as a lot of information about his terminal. This information may realistically allow the user to be re-identified and consequently to access his or her browsing on all sites using Google Analytics. And of course, this is 100% true, 100% technically accurate.
Same thing happens when you do a Google search, but okay.
Yeah. They said only solutions allowing to break this contact between the terminal and the server can address the issue.
So they should ban Google. Seriously?
Well, yeah.
I mean, if the same, so I don't understand. If the same thing happens when I do a Google search, and you don't want it to happen with analytics, well, just ban Google. Let's see what happens then.
So beyond the case of Google Analytics, they said this type of solution could also make it possible to reconcile the use of other analytics tools with the GDPR rules on data transfer. Okay, so that all makes sense. The issue is that the user's machine and web browser, or terminal as they say here, is posting its analytics directly to a Google domain. So its incoming IP address is always known to Google. To resolve this, the French recommendations, and this is in this formal document that they published, are that a proxy server would be a possible solution. They say, in view of the criteria mentioned above, one possible solution is the use of a proxy server to avoid any direct contact between the Internet user's terminal and the servers of the analytics tool, in this case Google. However, it must be ensured that this server fulfills a set of criteria in order to be able to consider that this additional measure is in line with what is presented by the EDPB, whoever they are, in his recommendations of 18 June 2021. Indeed, such a process would correspond to the use case of pseudonymization before data export. They said, as stated in these recommendations, such an export is only possible if the controller has established through a thorough analysis that the pseudonymized personal data cannot be attributed to an identified or identifiable individual, even if cross-checked with other information. It's therefore necessary, beyond the simple presence of a request from the user's terminal to the servers of the analytics tool, to ensure that all of the information transmitted does not in any way allow the person to be re-identified, even when considering the considerable means available to the authorities likely to carry out such re-identification. So in other words, they're talking about really being serious about erecting a barrier between the EU citizens and anyone downstream of this barrier. So, and they specify what is entailed. They said the server carrying out the proxification must therefore implement a set of measures to limit the data transferred. The CNIL, which is the group that created this document, considers in principle the following as necessary: the absence of transfer of the IP address to the servers of the analytics tool. If a location is transmitted to the servers of the measurement tool, it must be carried out by the proxy server, and the level of precision must ensure that this information does not allow the person to be re-identified, for example, by using a geographical mesh ensuring a minimum number of internet users per cell. So they're just giving some samples. And the replacement of the user identifier by the proxy server. To ensure effective pseudonymization, the algorithm performing the replacement should ensure a sufficient level of collision, i.e., a sufficient probability that two different identifiers will give an identical result after hash. Okay, now we start to have a problem, because if you do this, then you're breaking the point of analytics, which is to identify, the activity of the site. Although you are keeping the specific user who's visiting the site secret, so you are getting pseudonymized per user data still. Also, they specified the removal of referrer information from the site. That's a problem for analytics, because analytics wants to know where you are, where you are on the site, which is what the referrer information in the query header provides. Also, the removal of any parameters contained in the collected URLs, that is, URL tails, UTMs, also URL parameters, which may also cause a leakage of information. Also, reprocessing of information, they said, that can be used to generate a fingerprint, such as user agents, to remove the rarest configurations that can lead to re-identification, so make those all look the same. The absence of collection of cross-site or lasting identifiers, a CRM ID or any sort of a unique ID, and the deletion of any other data that could lead to re-identification. In other words, it is a daunting task. They go on to say the proxy server must also be hosted in conditions that ensure that the data it processes will not be transferred outside the European Union to a country that does not provide a level of protection substantially equivalent to that provided within the European Economic Area. So, wow. More and more, what we're seeing here is kind of the way they would like the internet to be in the EU, coming into head-to-head collision with the current operation of the internet, and asking for huge changes. Establishing a proxy would be a lot to ask for the typical website that just wants to use analytics because it was 2 lines of JavaScript code, and they got all this amazing information for free.
Yeah, we want to know how many people visit our site.
And which pages and what search terms brought them there, and all this cool stuff. The Google Analytics proxying service could be set up somewhere in the EU. Then EU websites would point their Google Analytics JavaScript to that services domain instead of to analytics.google.com. In that way, the visitors to any of these GDPR-compliant Google Analytics using websites would have their browsers query the proxy on their behalf. Since the proxy would be terminating their TLS connections, it would be able to strip identifying information from the query, make any changes it wanted to, insert randomization to confuse fingerprinters, and so on. So, we have another example here of the growing tension between privacy and commerce, and what they're asking for is feasible, but boy, are they going to enforce it? Are they going to require it? And it would require setting up a local proxy within the jurisdiction of any country or countries that wanted to enforce this level of anonymization through something like Google Analytics and route all the queries through it before it then goes to Google for their data crunching.
And who runs the proxy and sees the information on the proxy?
Well, they're saying that
like a data grab.
That would need to be in the EU, and it's going to be another centralization.
Let's add a third eyeball to watching this and see what happens.
But their point, of course, is that it's not leaving the EU for the US, and so it is a solution to the problem. But boy, it's a heavy lift in order to get in order to change the operation of something which has been in place already, what, Leo, like 15 years?
Yeah, and it's going to slow it down dramatically.
Yep.
We don't get, when you use Google Analytics, I don't get any individual information about visitors at all.
Right. You don't, but Google does.
Presumption is that Google does something with it. Yeah. By the way, if I were to run a local analytics program, I would get all of that information. I'd get all the IP addresses and everything. This just seems so wrong-headed to me. I don't understand.
I know.
I understand what they want. I don't understand how they think this is going to get them there.
Yeah, well, and again, it's like now we have to agree to cookies wherever we go. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, that's really worked. Oh, boy, has that solved that problem.